Now, Samuel, you kind of are getting at a pretty broad thing here when we're talking about, or I guess less broad, a more specific biblical kind of principle when we're talking about, and we've heard plenty of this in the United States, about how the church is called by Christ and by God to obey to a certain extent the leadership that God has allowed and ordained and put in place. And so that's kind of more of a specific issue biblically. But in the United States, you also got at we have an older evangelical movement here, a little bit more time for division to grow in the church as well. And so we see a lot more of that political division in the church here, I think, than you might in other, less developed evangelical communities and biblical communities, Christian communities. And so down here, we've heard, outside of the kind of specific biblical claims, we've heard a lot of this general idea from kind of more progressive Christians that it's unloving and it reflects poorly on the church when folks aren't masking, when folks are meeting for larger church gatherings, when they are kind of disobeying government and saying, we're going to praise the Lord and sing on Sunday morning. We're going to meet for, small group, large group, what have you. We're going to have kids ministry on Sundays. And I just kind of want to ask, is that something that you see in the Canadian Christian movement as well? Are you seeing that kind of broad claim that it reflects poorly and that it's unloving for the church to get at, these issues and to disobey in that way?
Absolutely. While we are a relatively young evangelical movement, we're highly also, in an odd sense, influenced by those American voices. Absolutely. And, I know that church has been receiving those kind of sentiments a lot, where they're claiming they're not loving their neighbors. But as James Coates has said several times before he was arrested, he's doing this out of love for God, out of love for his church, and out of love for his neighbors. Also, the way things are right now, if you are a local pastor, especially in Alberta, you're not allowed to open your church to people who are not part of the church already. So if an unbeliever wants to come in and hear the gospel, you essentially can't do that. You have to go through so many hurdles to make it happen. And that is not how it should be. It should not be okay to turn away anybody. And that's not loving. And he's also mentioned, without going into too much detail, one of his members at his local church died because they did not receive the adequate kind of health care that they needed because of how crazy right now things have been with hospitals. So he did not. I think the person needed a surgery that they didn't get in time because of how we've been reacting to COVID. And right now, too, this is even outside the church, God calls us that we have the right to work. If the government says, no, you don't have the right to work when God has given you that, how is that loving? So, what he's doing, he's definitely receiving the same kind of words that you're hearing in America. And, it's very concerning. It's very disappointing.
And so what it sounds like you're getting at there is that there is kind of a huge disparity, even in the Christian community, between folks who understand love in the biblical way and understand love in the kind of more cultural way, which is, as we kind of know as Christians, deeply watered down in the culture. What love means and how love works is just completely misunderstood, if not just deeply watered down in the culture. And so kind of what's responsible for that disparity? Where is that coming from? And what would you say to the Christians who are kind of reflecting more of the cultural love and abandoning those biblical principles of love in our communities?
That's a great question. One pastor that I love dearly, but this one pastor said to me that, he is okay with the government. So he's okay with churches defying the government. Now, I'm saying this as it relates to the question, but he said he's okay with the church defying the government. But the problem is that it just looks bad that it should be the church leading the charge. It should not be the church that would be controversial. Well, I'm like, wait a minute. We are the light of the world.
Right.
We are the salt of the earth. As John MacArthur says, we are the original Protestants. we should not be waiting for unbelievers to do righteous things. It should be on us to be doing so.
It'll be a
But a
long
big
wait.
part of it, exactly. And there's a fear that if we do the right thing, if we do the controversial thing, they will hate us. But newsflash, they already hate us, right? The world already hates us. But sometimes they don't hate us because we're not giving them the opportunity to realize how much they hate us, right? Now, I'm not saying I want us to be hated. Of course not. Who wants to suffer, right? Nevertheless, the Bible does say that all those who desire to live a godly life will be persecuted, and that we should not be surprised when the fiery trial comes upon us. So, to answer your question, a big part of the reason why I think we talk about love, really what we mean that we should be a fearful people, we should be afraid. And we've defined love as any action that does not offend people, which would then give them a basis to hate us.